Okay, cool.
All right. I see people coming online now, so thanks. Welcome back, everyone, to another Friday afternoon of Peer-to-Peer World virtual conference. Want to say a huge shout out to all of our hosts and sponsors and thank them for their involvement. We couldn't do it without them. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. Really appreciate all of their involvement. Without them, we couldn't offer this up free to everybody. So definitely appreciate their time. Moving on to the next slide. Again, really action-packed schedule through the 5 weeks. And if you can't catch them live, know that all the sessions are being recorded. So feel free to follow up afterwards or even listen again. Next slide, please. Just quick housekeeping. I think we all know how to use Zoom by this point, but if you have any questions along the way, as you think of them, put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them. Taylor will get to them at the end or along the way, and happy to address any of those, but definitely make sure you put them in the Q&A as you think of them. And then chat's also there if you want to chat with everybody. Also be sure to stay on the line at the end. There will be automatically a survey that pops up with just a few questions. Make sure you fill those out. The folks from Halo are doing a raffle and giving away some swag. So thanks to them for that. And with that, I am going to hand it off to Taylor.
Hello, hello. Hey, thanks, Mark. Hey, everyone. Thanks for being here today. It's good to have you here. I hope you've been having a good time at the Peer-to-Peer World event, and I appreciate everything that Mark and the team at Cathexis has done to put this together. It's a pretty big lineup. So we're going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart today, about why your event needs a brand or a rebrand, as we've seen a lot in the last 18 months, going on 2 years now. And I'm going to talk you through the steps in the branding process so that you can think about if you are considering either a new brand for a new event, rebranding an existing peer-to-peer fundraising event that you have, the things to think through. And I will get going and rolling and share a lot of information. So please just know that if you've got questions, type those into the chat. Mark, just like raise your hand, interrupt me if there's something that you feel like is really relevant to the conversation as I get going, and we'll open it up for questions at the end as well. All right, a little bit about me. If you don't know me, my name is Taylor Shanklin. My friends call me T Shank, and I am the founder and CEO of an agency called Barlele. So branding is what I do, and taking that brand and putting it into repeatable content marketing is what I love best. I'm joining you today from my home in Sugar Mountain, North Carolina. I also tell people it sounds like Candyland. It's getting cold here. It's like 50 degrees. So, I had to bundle up and get my hot chocolate going today. I've been in the nonprofit world and specifically in peer-to-peer for a long time, since about 2007. I'm a TEDx speaker, podcast host, and I love queso. I'm a Texas girl, originally from Texas. So give me some of that queso and you'll have a friend for life. All right, quick roadmap of what we're going to talk about. So I really want to talk about like where we are in the world today, what branding and marketing is, because a lot of times branding gets confused with marketing. Branding and the word brand feels many times like a nebulous concept. And so I want to break it down and actually talk about the distinction between branding, so you can think about branding your event, and then what marketing is, so you can think about marketing your event. We're going to talk about some examples of being remarkable, and then I'll walk you through the process to doing a brand work or a rebrand work. All right, so I know we're joining here in this virtual world today, and this is a topic that I think still is coming up for a lot of organizations, especially as we see things like peaks with the pandemic and spikes and, oh, we're back to normal. Oh, we can do our in-person again. No, never mind. We got to cancel again. I've been seeing a lot of this happen. And I know it's challenging. And that's why I wanted to come and talk today about this topic of branding for your event, because I've worked with and talked to a lot of organizations that have said, like, we really need to think how we're branding this event because it's different. It's not the walk that it once was, and we hope to go back to it, but it's different, right? And so whether you're thinking about virtual or hybrid or what is all this noise, and you're thinking like, OMG, WTF, I'm still not quite sure yet how to do it. Don't worry. It's okay. We're all falling together, but everything's going to be all right. So put on some Bob Marley jam and let's get through this together. I want to talk about what even makes up your event brand in the first place, because branding is often thought about as just logos and colors and pictures and the fluffy stuff that the marketing team does, right? But it is so much more than that. When you think about what a brand is, and specifically when you're thinking about what a brand is for your event, all of these things make up the brand. The brand is how you are perceived. It's how people remember you and think about your event and the experience they have at the event, maybe even before the event and even after the event. So all of these elements, like the audience experience, your programs and services, your differentiators, channels, where you're showing up with your event, your people behind the event, the mission of your organization, and yes, your visual brand identity for the event, all of these elements make up the actual brand of your event. And I like to talk about this at the beginning, again, because I think it's something that's often misunderstood about what a brand is. And it's all of these things working in tandem together and consistently in a holistic voice and a holistic personality and a holistic experience. We're going to get into some of these elements today. First, I want to start with some mind-blowing stats and some fake news. We're going to talk about some fake news today, right? Because there's a lot of that out there. Did you know 80% of brands believe that they deliver great customer or consumer experiences, and only 8% of consumers agree? A lot of times we get in our heads and we think, these are the things I need to say about my brand or my event. And so I'm just going to say these things. But it doesn't necessarily translate to something that moves the needle for the person on the other side, right? The person receiving the message, maybe the fundraiser, you want to come back, the participant, the donor, the volunteer. Well, let's talk about kind of why this happens, right? I think there's a lot of, things that go into branding that are often just overlooked, right? A lot of times people think that brand doesn't drive fundraising or registration or revenue, right? So it doesn't get a focus, as much focus as development and marketing. And we think often that marketing is branding, right? So that's kind of fake news cycle number one when it comes to thinking about branding, and why we need to take a step back and think about it today in the context of our events. How are we going to be interesting so that people want to come to this event of ours, especially when it's different than it probably was before, right? So fake news number one, the truth of it all is that strong brands generate interest, they attract new audiences, and they strengthen the overall marketing strategy. Right, there's more fake news out there about branding, and one of those things is that spending money on branding comes after other marketing spend, essentially, right? After we focus on lead gen spend for registrations, for driving signups, and only if there's some extra marketing budget. I don't know how many people have maybe had this kind of a conversation at their organization or heard this before, but I've heard it a lot. Well, we already have this allocated and we don't really have money to focus on the brand. The truth of it is that your brand story, your brand voice, your brand identity, again, that experience, that promise of the experience that you're defining for people around your event, has to define before you start spending money on the development and marketing tactics. Because if you have the brand message wrong and it doesn't resonate with people, then all of that money that you spent on lead gen and marketing and tactics might just go wasted. You might not get the results that you were hoping for. All right, the last bit of fake news that I want to talk about is that brand awareness doesn't convert. So this kind of relates to the first point of this. But a lot of times people think, I'm not going to spend money on brand awareness marketing. I just want to go straight to the leads. But the truth of the matter is that brand awareness efforts actually get you seen in the first place. This is what makes people stop scrolling and look up at you. I think about the world, and I don't know about you guys, but I think about the world in the context of everybody's on these phones all day long, all the time. When they're scrolling through their news feed, or scrolling through their Instagram feed, or scrolling through their email inbox, a strong brand that gets attention is what makes people pop up and say, I'm going to read that, or I'm going to open that. And a not strong brand, one that's not very clear or not very interesting looking or just not differentiated enough, gets scrolled on by. And so that kind of relates back also to the idea of let's stop and take a pause and think about what we're saying, how we're saying it, how we're communicating it, how it looks. What's that first impression we're making with the branding of our event? Is it going to make people stop scrolling, or are they going to scroll on by? We'll talk about getting into that. How do you do that, right? One of the first ways to do this is to recognize that doing the normal thing is only adding to more noise. There is a lot of noise on social media and in email and in everyone's day-to-day lives, right? We're all juggling a lot. We're all balancing a lot. And so if you just kind of do the same thing that's always been done before, or your stuff kind of just looks, okay, but not that different, then all you're doing is adding to the noise. And I speak from this place of truth here to help you think differently today about your brand, to take a step back. I like to ask people to take a step outside of themselves because we get so close to our brand, right? We get so close to the way our visuals look, our images look, and even things like the colors we're using, right? We get so used to it. A lot of times it's hard to step back and think differently about it. So today's an opportunity to do that. Don't just be normal with your brand. Think about how you can create a sense of FOMO. So everybody wants, to get people involved in their event, engaged. One of the best ways to engage people and to, again, stop the scroll is to think about how can we use the elements of FOMO, the fear of missing out, in our branding and in our event. I'll show some examples about that today. Don't be normal, right? Anybody here, Purple Cow, Seth Godin fan? If you haven't read The Purple Cow by Seth Godin, I highly recommend it. I'm not going to tell you it has anything to do with peer-to-peer fundraising or nonprofit fundraising or marketing even, but it's a really, really amazing book that makes you think about that. Yeah, how do you not be normal? How do you stand out? How do you be the purple cow in the pasture, right? And differentiate. Because successful brands, successful marketing, successful events, whatever you're doing to get the word out there about your mission and your cause and your programs needs to stand out in that normal. So I encourage you today to not be normal. Sometimes that's scary. I recognize that, right? Sometimes it is scary to feel like you're going out on a limb, or you're maybe pushing the envelope a little bit in your brand. But that is the point of branding. All right, so let's talk a little bit about branding versus marketing, right? What is the difference? I think about what branding really is. It's owning your voice and showing up with it through stories, visualization, and proof of how you bring value into someone's life. And when we talk about bringing value into someone's life, think about it today from the context of the event experience that you provide to them. You probably give them things like community, getting into their, life aspirations of how they want to give back or be involved with their community. Maybe they were affected by your mission in some way, and they want to show up and be a part of that community. So it's really important to tell the story of how your event, within the brand story of your event, how it brings value into someone's life. Why should they show up? Now, when we think about marketing is the tactics or are the tactics and strategies to get in front of people and have that brand get seen and have that voice be heard. So I like to think about it at the top level of branding. You got to figure out first, what are we going to say? Who are we saying it to? Like, why is it even important to them? And a lot of times we know it's important to us internally at our organization. But we have to, again, take a step outside of ourselves sometimes and think about what is important about this to the people we are trying to get involved at our event. What's important to the team captains? What's important to the participants? What is important to people who have only donated? What's important to people who maybe have donated to our Facebook fundraiser or social campaign? Then once we have that really clearly defined, we say, all right, how do we spread it like wildfire? That's when marketing takes over and says, we're going to take this brand, this messaging, this look, this feel, this identity, this voice, and now we're going to amplify it. So branding is about differentiation, right? Being that purple cow that stops people from scrolling. I'll give you some examples of really great branded peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns and nonprofit campaigns. I mean, I know that we've seen some of these before, but they're worth bringing up because they are purple cows. And I just applaud them so much in this because they did break the mold, right? And you think about St. Baldrick's and the head shaving, like that is something that like, whoa, that makes you stop scrolling. And the ice bucket challenge, it made people stop scrolling. And the powerful imagery and videos that Charity Water uses makes people stop scrolling. There is a reason why these campaigns are successful. They really went hardcore with the brand to make people stop scrolling. I also love Well Aware, the I Stink shower strike campaign. They really make people stop scrolling when they're saying, hey, don't take a shower for a whole week or 2 weeks. Keep going. See how long you can stink for. It's funny. And then they tie it into the mission, right? But it makes people wake their heads up and say, I want to pay attention to this. And that is why these campaigns have been so successful. All right, let's talk about not a nonprofit version of owning it and differentiating, but a famous basketball player, Michael Jordan, right? He really gives us a lesson, a great lesson in differentiation when it comes to branding, right? I was a child of the 80s and 90s, so I grew up watching the Bulls when they were just in their prime. And everybody knew Michael Jordan for the, the slam dunk and the tongue out. All right, let's talk about marketing. So marketing is about amplification, All right, so first you own your brand, you own that brand voice. You say, I'm going to stick my tongue out all the time, right? Whether he intended to or not, it was something that differentiated him. Now, how do I amplify that? How do I make sure that that's on everything, right? So marketing is about taking that brand voice and then amplifying it in lots of places consistently, right? So he always had the tongue out. He was always doing the slam dunk. That was his thing. It was his signature. He put that on his shoes, right? So this is a lesson in owning that brand and replicating it. I remember I had an older brother, and so like he was a huge Bulls fan, and he had all the posters and the shoes and the shirts and everything had that Michael Jordan logo on it with him doing a slam dunk. And if you pictured it in your head, you could picture his tongue out. So that is a lesson in the marketing, the amplification of the brand. So when you think about your event, what is that unique brand experience, that differentiation factor that you can do to get people excited, to get people remembering your event over anything else, to pull people in, to stop them from scrolling? And then how do you take that and amplify the message and replicate it very consistently across channels? And so I know this is an example of Michael Jordan and his shoes and his products, but I share this one because I think it's a good one, again, to think high level about how do you own your brand and then how do you replicate it so that everyone remembers you for that unique, different brand, so that everyone remembers your event for the unique, different experience that they had at it. I give a couple of shout outs to some nonprofits who I think are doing a great job with their brand. So National Hemophilia Foundation, I've got some good friends there, and they, really consistently own this message of uniting people. Right. So these are just a couple of samples of things from social media where, again, you can see the consistency in message. And we talked about community, and a lot of people come out to your events for community. So they really focus in on the meaning of uniting, right? United, we celebrate. United, we walk. Nothing can stop us when we unite. I'm going to get another shout out again to Shower Strike. I really like the Shower Strike. Some things that I want to call out that I think work well in this brand, and this is just a screenshot of their fundraising site, is really clear messaging on what you're supposed to do as a participant, right? So when you go to their event site and you read about it, it's just really clear what the event is about and what you, who's signing up to do it, is supposed to do. There's also a really clear tie between the event and the mission. I think they've got a nice color palette. Again, like when you think about how words and visuals and colors, everything come together, it differentiates. And I really like their logo. It's simple but smart, where you can't really see it in the screenshot, but I recommend go check out Shower Strike as well. The O in shower is just like an F, no sign. So great job, Shower Strike team. Anyone working on that? All right, I'm going to pause for a second. Mark, have there been any questions that have come up in the chat?
Nothing yet.
Okay. All right, well, let's get into the pillars of the brand strategy process. Okay, so we've talked high level about branding, why it's important, even a lot of times how it gets confused with marketing. Now I want to actually walk you through, if you're considering a rebrand of your event, or you have a new event and you're like, we need a brand for the event, and you don't really know what the process is or what you need to do or what should happen when you are either defining a brand or rebranding. I'm going to walk you through that. All right, so when you think about branding, I really believe that there are 3 pillars of the process. There's defining your brand essence. So those are the things like your purpose, your vision, your mission, your values, the personality of your brand, right? So the purpose of your event, the vision for your event, the mission of your event, the values of you as an organization, and how does your event tie into that? And then the personality of your event. Is it a funny thing like the shower strike, I stink? Is it a community focus like Unite Day or the Unite event? Is it something we're going to support it virally, like the Ice Bucket Challenge? That's the personality of the event. Then you move into, and I think it's important to think through that first. Then after that stage, think through the brand messaging of the event. So again, we're going to start high level and we're going to narrow it down. So we have our brand essence. And then we start thinking about, okay, now what's the actual messaging of the event? What are we saying about it, right? How is the event different? How is it unique? Why would anyone want to show up? Why would they want to fundraise for it? What's the tagline? What are some headlines and things that we say? And how are we a trusted voice on this event and on this mission focus? And then lastly, you get to the visual identity. I think it's so important to do that part last because it should reflect what you define in your messaging and your brand essence. So when you get to the point of developing a logo or coming up with a new logo or thinking through, like, what does it actually visually look like when we get down to the brass tacks and we have to create things like social media graphics or an event website or an event logo? I think it's important to have all of those other things defined, like the essence and the messaging first, because that will help to inform what it looks like, and what it looks like should reflect the essence and the messaging. Right, so let's talk a little bit more about the essence of your brand. And if you've got a piece of paper or something handy, or you want to type out some notes, I think this is a useful exercise as we're walking through this, to take some notes about your event. What kind of vibe, not to sound too much like a millennial, but what kind of vibe do you want people to have when they are at your event or when they're participating online with your event? Maybe you're providing Facebook groups and Facebook challenges, or doing some of those new things like that. What kind of vibe do you want people to get? What kind of spirit and what kind of engagement experience do you want people to have at your event? Write some of those down. Is it going to be something funny like the shower strike, something really bold and wild like the head shaving contest? Or is it going to be really community focused? We've got a walk. We've got a lot of parents who have kids affected by a disease, and we have this really big community for them, just as an example. So what's the essence? What's the vibe you want to give off at your event? It's important to capture that at the beginning. Once you have that defined, and please feel free to type into the chat and share anything about the vibe that you wish to have for your event. Maybe there's even a current vibe. Let's go back to that real quick. Maybe there's even a current vibe of your event and you're like, kind of needs a refresh, right? Write down your future thinking of the vibe that you want your event to have. Once you figure out that vibe and that essence, then I think it's important to really think through, okay, who are we even talking to? Right? Before we start just putting things out in the market, putting things out in our email, putting things out in our social media, let's really think about who our audience is. And here's where I'd like to stop and take a pause for a second, because again, I want you to write this down, and I'm going to be sharing these slides afterwards. They'll be available so that you can take this exercise and do it with your organization. But define your top 3 to 4 key audiences. In the context of peer-to-peer, I know that there's a lot of standards, right? There's Maybe you've got team captains who have been team captains for 2 or 3+ years. Maybe you've got newer team captains. Maybe you've got people who have participated for a long time, but they're not yet a team captain. Maybe you have national sponsors as an audience, donors who have given but not actually attended your walk. So what are those top 3 to 4 key audiences of yours that you think are the most important to communicate with? And the reason why I think it's important, because I've, again, heard this kind of a lot over the years. Well, we want to talk to everyone, right? Well, when you try to talk to everyone, you talk to no one. And so when you really think through your audience and who they are, how they've been at your event before, how they've engaged before, and then you can do some simple segmentation on those key audiences with that clear brand voice, but then that specific messaging to those audiences. They're going to feel more like the event is also about them. And that's really important. It's really important that we make people feel like our brand is also about them. And I don't think that a lot of people talk about it in this way. Probably, again, we kind of get focused and myopic on, well, what do we need to say? How much money do we need to raise? And then let's just blast that out there. But by our very nature, I like to think about it from the perspective of, how do people work? What's the psychology of people? And how do we tap into that? People show up for things that matter to them in their life. And that thing might be you and your organization and the work that you're doing. We've got to make sure that when we think about our branding and our messaging, that we're thinking about it from that lens of what's in it for our audience, what motivates them to show up, to train. Maybe if you're doing an endurance event, to train for months on end. What's the motivating factor? If they're a donor and they're not a participant, but they've given to you before, what was their motivation? If they're a past participant who's become a team captain over the last year, what was their motivation? Right? Maybe they're a mentor. I've been involved with some peer-to-peer programs before where I was a mentor because I had participated a lot. What was my motivation for that, right? Usually it's a personal connection in those cases. So tap into that with your branding. Any questions on this? Sometimes this part spurs some questions.
Nothing here yet, but I like it. Good stuff. I'm learning tons.
Well, feel free to chime in. This is kind of a workshop-y session in this part. All right, so we talked about who they are. Why does it matter to them? I think I got ahead of myself a little bit on that. Sometimes, like I said, I get rolling. But let's talk a little bit more specifically about that. And when you think about your brand, you probably don't typically think about tapping into the psychology of people. Maybe you do. I like to use this framework of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Connecting the human elements of value that your audience needs when choosing to give you a gift, or when choosing to show up to your event, or when choosing to show up to fundraise for you. And this is really at the core of defining your brand messaging and your brand identity. Again, because it's about thinking about how is it that you're fulfilling the mission, but they're a big part of it. And if you look up here at the top of the pyramid, the self-actualization, right? Achieving one's full potential, including creative activities or esteem needs, right? The prestige and the feeling of accomplishment. And then the belongingness and love needs, intimate relationships and friendships. That top section of the pyramid, I believe, is why people show up to peer-to-peer fundraising events for the most part, right? They want to have that belonging. It's their community. They're in it with you for a reason. And so you are helping fulfill those life aspirations. And this should be reflected in your branding. Now, when you look at the bottom of the pyramid, Safety needs, security and safety, physiological needs, those basic needs in the hierarchy, those might be things that you're doing the work on, right? So you might be providing safety and security through healthcare access. You might be providing safety and security to the homeless. You might be providing safety and security to victims of assault or victims of drunk driving or whatever your cause is. Those are probably the things that you are doing as your mission. And so reflecting that as, here, you get to be a big part of this big thing that fits into your life aspirations. And we are here doing the work to make sure these basic needs are met. That's the way that I think about using these elements of value, things that human beings need to happen in their lives, and then taking that and thinking through how is that reflected in the way that we communicate in our branding. All right, so now I'll take a moment and think through that. I'd like you to just take a pause and write out, what are some of those value elements that you bring to your audience of supporters? Again, just take 60 seconds and write out a few and do a time check. And feel free to chat any in and share what you think some of those values might be. Aligning the values is important for getting to the next part. It's important to figuring out, okay, well, what are we actually gonna say, right? And we need to think first through, what are the values of our audience and the values of our organization and the values of this fundraising event or this program? And how do we align that together? And then once you have those values figured out, then you can figure out, again, we're kind of starting up here and working our way down and nuancing things. Then you can start to put those values into clear language for the audience, right? This can help to inform the copy that you put on the website, the things that you say on your social media, the kinds of things that maybe you say in videos to promote the event, or what you're running on Facebook ads for your event, right? So once you have those values, then you get into the phase of actually determining your message map. And the message map is what really then informs that copy writing usually. So I like to, I recommend you have 3 to 4 pillar messages. These are your value props, right? They should align to the values of your audience that we defined with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they should align with your brand essence and the personality, right? So you take all of those things and you continue to whittle it down and then get into the nitty-gritty of doing the work of the branding. So your pillar messages, these are your main value prop statements. And some of these can actually be the things that you say on your website, as an example, on your event site. I recommend 3 to 4 things in a message map. I think when you start to get beyond that, then it's just too much to say. Things start to get confusing, then you're being all things to all people and saying a lot of things, and then messaging gets muddy. So keep it simple. Less really is more. And I also recommend no more than 3 to 4 supporting statements under each pillar message. So I'll give you an example. Our walk, like let's say pillar message is our walk program gives back, gives for every dollar created, given to our walk program, we are able to buy 10 backpacks for kids in need of backpacks this year. And then supporting statement is like, how do we do it, why you're important to it, and what's maybe the timing, as an example. So again, giving people the value prop of like, what's happening, what you're doing, why it matters to the community. And then supporting statements are things that you can say to say, this is how. So we have a big mission, that's the pillar message. Supporting statements are, this is how it gets done. This is how we intend to do it. This is our plan. When you think about your event, what are some of those value props for coming to the event, fundraising for the event, and then what are some of the supporting statements that say, and this is what we plan to do with it. This is how you are supporting the work of the mission. This is how you showing up and fundraising for this event supports this work. It could even be things like, I know a lot of, let's just talk about walks as an example. Walks chronically have this problem of a lot of people register and then they don't fundraise, right? So you could think through, what's my message map to people to explain the importance of fundraising. It's not just about walking. It's about supporting the cause to do X, Y, and Z. And those X, Y, and Z statements are supporting statements that show how they actually contribute to the work happening. All right, so we've done our message map. Now we get into what's it look like, right? So we really think through, what's the vibe, what's the essence, who are we talking to, what do we need to say to them? And then after all of those things, you get to define, what does this look like? And just to reiterate, this is really important, I think, that it's done last, because that essence, that who you're talking to, those communication points, the pillar messages really should inform the visual identity of the brand. That's when you get into the fun stuff, the creative stuff. This is often my favorite part. I like to start with a mood board. Raise your hand, high five if anyone has ever done mood boards before. You can do these in a lot of different ways. These are just some screenshots of different ways to do it. Sometimes it's getting a bunch of people in a room and putting a bunch of Post-it notes on the wall and kind of thinking through, things that you like, visuals that you like, brands that you like. I like to do a digital mood board often, with just starting to look at imagery and colors and fonts and pairing things together in one place and seeing how they look. You do the mood board before you go too deep into design. So the mood board kind of sets the tone. Once you've figured out what that brand essence is for your event or your brand, then you say, okay, how do I start to visualize this? How do I take that tone, right, and that essence and put it into visuals? And so a lot of times a mood board is just sort of about throwing some things up on the wall together and seeing how they then visually look together, right? So you could have different types of photography. You could have combinations of images and photography and graphical elements or iconography. This is where you can play around with different font pairings and combinations and different color schemes. So again, it sets the mood for what design will look like. And so a mood board usually helps create a general design direction that you think you want to go in. And that can be really helpful if then you're passing it off to a designer to then actually do the final designs. Mood boards are really helpful if you're really thinking through things like, what's my event website going to look like? Okay, well, we can start with kind of a mood board, maybe some themes and some templates and some colors, and maybe this kind of an image here and this kind of an image here. And then you can hand it off to a designer to really finesse it. All right, so with that, you also start to choose your brand palette, right? Color palettes. I like to use color palette generator tools. There's a lot of them online. If you just Google the one called colors, the first bullet point is one of my favorite ones. Let's say you start with a main color. Maybe you already have a main color or two with your brand, and you want to see other colors that are recommended that fit well in a palette with those colors, because maybe you want some accent colors and some other things to use. It's really helpful for that. Canva also, if you're a Canva fan, Canva has a color palette generator as well, where even you can like upload a logo or an image and it will spit out a recommended color palette for you. So you don't have to be an expert in color theory to really do a lot when it comes to helping to define your color palette and how it looks. All right, then we get into logo. So again, I like to do these things in these steps, even mood board and then color palette and then logo development. When you think about your logo, think about how can you somehow play in to the meaning of either the name of the event or your organization. Maybe it can be something subtle, right? I don't always think it has to be really obvious, but think about a way graphically in which you can play into the meaning of the name of your event. Something that I like to do is look for inspirations and logos and other brands that I admire, right? And ask yourself, well, what do you actually like about it? Not just, oh, I like this logo, but why do I like it? Sometimes the reasons behind why you like a certain logo or look of a brand are, well, it really come down to, well, I like clean lines, or I like minimal design, or I like really funky, fresh stuff with a lot of big, bold colors, right? And so these are the kinds of conversations that you'll want to have internally as you're developing the brand for your event. Not just what do we like, but why do we like it? Get to the root of what is connecting with you visually and aesthetically. Also think through, how do you want people to feel when they see your brand? A lot of times the feeling people get is kind of subconscious, but again, this goes back to the vibe and the essence. Is it one that you want to be really modern and minimalist, or do you want it to be really fun and spunky, or do you want it to be kind of community focused, right? So these different elements and brand personalities actually should play into the development of your logo. A couple of other tips on this: don't recommend using any more than 2 fonts in one logo. You will want to also create monochrome versions of your logo, so a black and white logo, or one that can go, if you can't print in color, so create the color version of your logo and then create grayscale and monochrome logo versions. And then lastly, design for the ability to use a mark or other variation of your logo. So as an example, you might have instances within your branding where you want to use just maybe the emblem portion of the logo, like the mark, maybe the icon within the logo. Sometimes people need to use just what's called the word mark in the logo, where they don't want to show the icon, but they show the words of the event. So you want to think through those things, and you also want to think through things like, how is my logo laid out? Do I have a version where it's stacked vertically? Do I have a version where it's stacked horizontally? And so having alternate versions of logo often becomes important when you're printing t-shirts and mailers and different marketing materials that you're going to be using for your event. If you've got sponsors and they're going to be putting your logo on their site, sometimes they require, I've heard this happen before, sometimes they require the monochrome version of the logo. And so just having all of those things done as part of the process of the brand for your event or the rebrand is important to make sure that you've got it ready to go when the time comes up that you need it. All right, let's talk about typography. So your fonts, your font choice. So these are just some different font styles to think through. I recommend this digital world, use as many web safe fonts as possible, and get creative with font pairings. Like you can put modern and elegant fonts together, and that is something that can actually help to differentiate you. Things like the pairing of fonts and using interesting fonts and having fonts paired in an unexpected way often visually just makes people perk up and think, oh, that looks different, that looks interesting. And so really think about your font choices and how you can get creative and stand out and be that purple cow, even in your font choice and font pairing. Right, once you have all of those things, the final step is then putting it all into a brand guideline. So the brand guideline is the document that you use internally. It's not something that you share out in like public marketing materials, but this is what keeps everybody on board at your organization for your event about the brand guidelines for your event branding. So it should have, it's basically like a rule book for your brand. So it's got your colors in it, all of the hex codes and color codes that you're going to need. You're going to want to have, do's and don'ts with the logo lined out in there. So like, do use the logo this way, don't use the logo that way. Stylings with your fonts, stylings with imagery as well. I recommend putting into your brand guideline book to show people. A lot of times we have to use stock photography, right? So hopefully if when we're talking about event fundraising, a lot of times you have photos from your event, which is great, because then on your event website, you don't usually have to use a lot of stock photography. But if you do have to use stock photography, it's important in your brand guideline to show the kind of style of photography that you use. So are we focused on pictures of people? What kind of even colors and tones in the photography do we allow and do we use within our brand? So those are things that do get into the nitty gritty of the consistency in the brand. All right. I think that wraps it up. I have for you today, if you want to go download a template to be remarkable, right? And to start thinking about your brand guidelines, I've got a free template online. Don't even have to give me your info. It's literally there totally for free for you to go grab and use. I've got a Canva version. I've got a Google Slides version. If you go to, let's see, I've got it here. Oh, I'm going to talk about my top list real quick. But if you go to barlele.com/learn, it's going to take you to a place where you can download barlele.com/learn. You can download a brand guideline template. And in my brand guideline template that I have for you, it has not only the colors and logos and that kind of section, but it also has all of the pieces of the other parts that we walked through, like the brand positioning, the taglines, the headlines, the brand essence, the personality, and all of that stuff. I believe that all of those things should go into a brand guideline. So I actually call it a brand book because it's really more like a book. Okay, so if anything, just be interesting, be different. Don't settle for normal. Be the purple cow. It is scary, but people who do it, who go out on that limb and say, we really are going to create a different and unique brand experience for our event, it perks people's heads up. It gets people to pay attention. It is the point of branding, to differentiate, to stand out, to not be normal. All right, lastly, I am going to share a few quick tools and tips, things that I recommend you do or think about in the process of branding. So I like to use always a project collaboration tool for a brand. I like tools like Trello or Asana. Kanban boards work really well because branding and the whole process of doing brand is very visual. And I like the ability to even use tools like that for mood boarding, where you can kind of get a very good visual representation on Kanban boards of different images and photography and things like that kind of work together. Give yourself a lot of time to ask questions. So always make sure you have ample discovery time in a branding process. Ask people with different perspectives. So not just the event team, not just the program team, but pull in different stakeholders. Maybe if you've got a really close group of team captains or mentors for your event, you can pull them in and get their perspective. And again, what is the brand to them? What do they think brings value in the brand and in the work and in the event? brand guideline, like I said, why start from scratch? If you want to steal mine, just go to barleylay.com/learn. And I use Canva all day long. It's Canva. Use it for, it's really good for mood boards, doing mock-ups. And then once you have your brand defined, it's just an incredibly easy tool to create all of the promo materials you need for your event. And if you're thinking about doing a brand or a rebrand, I mean, you can do stuff, you can get stuff done quick in 4 weeks, but usually I would say to do a good job on it, it's probably going to be about a 6 to 8 week effort. And that's if you're moving pretty fast and people are really tuned into it. So give yourself ample time and space for the process, for the creative process, for the questioning and the thinking and pulling it all together. All right. Thank you. I want you to slam dunk your event brand. So I hope this was helpful. I'm here for questions if you've got any. I don't know if any came into the chat, but happy to answer any questions and happy to, if you just have anything you want to follow up on, email me at taylor@barleylay.com.
That was awesome. All right, I'm just pasting in the URL again. That was barleylay.com/learn, right?
Yep, that's right.
So I put that in the chat. That was a question asked, but yeah, a lot of great stuff covered. Any other questions before we wrap up today? Or Taylor, any final thoughts?
It's so much to think about. I know. Sometimes it's a lot to think about, and so give it some time, take a step back. Again, if you are thinking about or needing to brand or rebrand your event, just feel free to reach out. I'm here for any questions. And then hopefully that template helps you with the process and the steps, and it gives you something that you can use. Awesome.
Well, thank you very much, Taylor, for the session, and thanks everybody for attending, and hope to see you in the next sessions this afternoon. But if not, have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.